Welcome back to DAGryffyn Hobby. My name's Dave. I've made some more progress on the layout expansion, and I want to show you a little bit about how I do the roadbed. Sometimes progress is obvious. You can just tell by looking that a whole lot of work was done. This is not one of those times. I've done a lot of work, but a lot of it isn't that noticeable. But that doesn't make it any less important. I spent a good amount of time getting the roadbed under the entire outer loop, and I've had questions about how I do the roadbed. So I figured I'd put together a bit of a video on the roadbed, how I do it, and why. Before we get to that though, I want to show you the things that I've accomplished since the last video. I haven't got all the wiring done, but I've gotten just enough done that I can actually run a train. I have some loose track pins on the expansion, so you can see when it gets to the bridge, it kind of slows down pretty significantly. But that will be remedied. I have run wire from the far end of the bridge all the way around the layout, all the way back to my distribution block by the power supply. The next step for that would be to actually drop some feeders so I have a good consistent power supply all the way around. With the lift bridge, there's something I was really concerned about, and that was not accidentally running the train off the edge of the track when the bridge is open. I'd like to think I wouldn't do it, but you never know. You get distracted, you're not paying attention, you forget something's close, you lift up the bridge, and boom, you got a busted train. So how do you get around that? You kill the track when the bridge is open. But how? That's the question. The way I did it was by utilizing some small contact switches. Going faster than I thought. When the lift bridge closes, it presses this switch, which then turns the power back on for the block before the bridge. With the foam removed, you can see the switch I'm using. Similar to this one, input, and then two outputs, one for normally open, one for normally closed. And then the pressure activates the switch. I picked up a box of switches off of Amazon, and it had a few different styles of switches, which is great because I ended up using two different ones. Here we have power coming in from the transformer and then out to the track. So anytime this is down, it's sending power to the track. When it's up, that's it, no power, train stops, doesn't plummet into the pit. These are the two switches I used. On the open end, I use this one. When the bridge comes down, hits that, hits the switch. Great, works fantastic. On the pivot side of the bridge, I have the switch with this longer rod. So when the bridge pivots up, it activates the switch, thus sending power to the track. Great thing about these switches is that when the bridge is in place, you don't see either switch. On the pivot side, the switch is down there. You can see it sticking upwards. When the bridge closes, you can hear it click and activate the switch. I was not originally going to use switches for this purpose, but the way I had wanted to do it wasn't going to work. Can't claim that the idea was mine, but it was super slick and I really, really liked it. They utilized special dowel pins for the bridge that had electrical contacts in them. And the way it worked was that you sent power to the bridge through one of the dowel pins, and then from the bridge back out to the track on the other side. So when you raised the bridge, it cut power to the bridge and the track on either side of the bridge, which was really neat because essentially you were turning the lift bridge itself into the switch. Since I couldn't get those dowel pins, I feel like these switches will do the job just fine. So at this point, the outer loop is complete. The track is laid and the roadbed is in place. What remains is to drop the feeders for the track and secure the track to the roadbed. I cut part of the wood out under the bridge here so that I could do a little bit of scenery underneath it to make it look like the bridge is actually needed. Under the bridge, you can see a white conduit. I installed that so that I could easily pull wires through that space in case it all ends up behind foam or other scenery. Then I won't need to struggle with that. This one I do plan on it all being hidden behind scenery. I want to build the table down so that I can actually do a nice scenic valley or gorge underneath this bridge. A number of people had asked me previously when I was going to paint this and detail it. I was pretty sure that I was going to be changing things, and that's exactly what's going to be happening now. So that's why I never really bothered painting and detailing this. I hope most of it stays the same, but I also don't know what I'm going to change. And when I start to change things, sometimes I just go with it and end up changing a lot more than I intended. It's currently an absolute disaster in here. I've got construction materials everywhere. I've got parts of the layout everywhere. I keep tripping over things. There's just so much going on in here. Now that I've got the outer loop mostly done, I'm close to being able to run trains on it again. I have to clear off the outer loop on the other side of the layout. There's some things stacked there to keep them out of my way. So once I clean that off and do the feeder wires around this expansion, I'll be able to run trains on this outer loop. And that's super exciting. The inner loop, I am not going to expand right away. I've got the track kind of laid out on the expansion, but I'm no rush to get it going. There are a couple of things I need to do to make the inner loop work, and one of them is to bring the track level down 1.5 inches from where it is on the main part of the layout. I wanted the two tracks on this expansion to be at the same height. So that's something that's going to take a little bit of work. And I want to make sure that the outer loop is in tip-top operating condition before I go and start taking apart the inner loop. The layout might be an absolute mess, and I can't do a full loop yet. But before I go and show you the bit about the roadbed, let's at least get a couple shots of an engine running on the new expansion. I don't know if I've ever directly addressed this, and I've had a couple of comments recently asking about it. How do I secure the roadbed and the track to my layout? I'm sure I've mentioned it. I know I've answered questions about it over time. I don't know if I've ever actually shown what I do. I'm going to tell you what I do and why I do it. A lot of times people will secure the track to their table, nails, screws, whatever. And I feel that using something like a nail or a screw is just going to carry the vibrations from the train through the track, right through the roadbed and to the table itself, causing noise. I'm no expert. This is just my opinion, and it's based on what I've tried and what I've observed to work and not work for me. The nice thing about nails and screws is that it keeps everything right where it needs to be. A downside to nails and screws, I think, besides noise transmission or vibration transmission, is you run a risk of damaging the track or damaging the ties if you over tighten something or hit the nail down too far. So if I don't use nails and screws, how do I do it? I use inexpensive silicone caulk. I've never specifically tried different types of caulk, like an acrylic or something like that. Some of them, if it's not a silicone-based caulk, I'm told that it will eat through the foam. So I've just never tried it. I use whatever silicone caulk I can find for the least amount of money. I was using a really cheap clear caulk at one point, and it just stunk so bad. So I don't use that anymore. This Alex Flex by DAP. It's a white, crack-proof paint projects. So it's paintable. This stuff doesn't stink. It works well, and I've got no odor to deal with. Because the odor of the other stuff was just, it was too much. I have so far secured the roadbed up to this point here. The track is only held in place currently by small nails because I'm not quite ready to glue it down. When I am ready to glue down the track, what I do is I take the caulk and I squeeze it under a tie. And I just try to get a good amount in there so that it's really touching as much of the tie as possible and the roadbed beneath it. Then while I wait for that to dry, I'll stick a nail or two in there just to keep it where I want it to be. Then once it's dry, I pull the nail out and the track is good. It does allow for a little bit of side-to-side movement if there's expansion and contraction. If you hit it hard, it doesn't break loose. It just moves a little, goes back to where it was. I have had maybe 2 or 3 ties let go because I've hit the track really hard when I was working on the layout. And all you need to do to fix that is pick a different tie and put a little bit more caulk underneath it. So for me, it's worked really well. Also, in places where I've wanted to remove the track after it's been caulked down, I just use my multi-purpose old kitchen steak knife. I slide it between the tie and the roadbed and just kind of cut the caulk, and it comes right off. And then you can kind of pick it out from in between the tie. And I'm not going to claim that it's a perfect method. There are drawbacks to any method, but for me, it works really well. I've been able to take track off with minimal damage to the roadbed, and I'm going to continue doing it because, like I said, it works for me. The roadbed I've used on this layout is this Woodland Scenics track bed. Comes in a roll, super easy to work with. If you need to do turns, you just slice it down the middle and do turns just like you would with cork. I feel that it's easier to work with on the turns than the cork, and I really like the sound deadening qualities of this foam. But again, that's a preference, so use whatever you like. For me, this does the job. Okay, so how do I go from this stage where the track is just sitting here to having roadbed? The first step is to make sure that the track is exactly where I want it. Usually I will stick a nail in the furthest point just to keep it where I want it to be. Then I'll take a pencil and run it along at an angle on one side of the center rail. I'll remove the nail, separate the track. Then I'll try to remove the track without yanking it around too much, so the rest of the track is still in the spot where I want it to be. Just because I'm thinking of it at the moment, I have not done any actual measurements or comparisons directly, but I feel like this blue foam is more irregular in thickness than the pink foam that I've gotten. Could just be the luck of the draw. But this blue foam that I'm using here is really quite a bit irregular throughout the whole span of the 4x8 sheet. Just something to consider. I think the pink stuff, in my opinion, is a little better. It's a few pounds lighter than the blue stuff. It's a little easier to cut. It comes pre-scored in a couple places to snap the boards in half. And I feel like it's slightly more irregular in thickness. So the line that I made on the foam is now here, so I know where to lay the roadbed. I don't know if you can see on the camera, but I do have 2 lines here because I had everything set. I thought I knew where it was, and then I realized it wasn't quite exactly where I wanted it. So I've got 2 lines. And really, it doesn't matter that much. They're close enough that I use either of them. It's going to line up okay. And besides, I'm going to start on this side where I already have the road bed, and I'm going to line it up with that and go from there. I always try to account for some overlap at the beginning and the end of the section that I'm doing. So that way, when it's all laid down, I can cut across both layers of foam and end up with a seam that lines up almost perfectly. I would have better luck if I tended to use good razor blades. A lot of my razor blades I end up using until they really don't cut anymore. So if I always used a new razor blade, I'd get a better result. But I overlap them and then cut them so that they line up really well. On the turns, I just put the foam on its edge and go for the length of the space that I'm trying to cover. And like I said, extra on each end so that I don't end up short. It really doesn't matter if it's exact because I have to keep going anyway, but I'm shooting for the end of the turn just before the bridge. And as long as it completes the turn, it doesn't really matter how far it goes because I can fill in the rest from the end of this piece to the bridge with scraps. Okay, now that I have the piece, I have to cut it in half because this piece will be completely installed on the turn. It will flex a little bit side to side, so if you're doing like a gradual flex track, you know, it will work for that. But beyond that, if you want to do any sort of radius, you do have to cut it. If I flip it over, you can see, hopefully, that it's pre-scored. And this is also a time that a nice new razor blade really makes a difference. So I think I'm going to go find one. Okay, new blade. Of course, when it's really, when you have a really sharp blade, it doesn't care where the score is, and it will just make its own cut. You'll see if you try to bend it to the turn, it's not going to sit flat, but once you put the adhesive down, it does stick very well. And there's a little bit of stretch to it, so you can stretch it a little bit to cover your space a little bit better. So it's really very forgiving. For this part, all you need is the caulk and something to spread it with. Usually I use a spackle knife. I don't know where it is. It's probably inside with the spackle. So I'm going to use this piece of shim. You don't need to cover the entire space because you're going to be spreading it out. And you also don't have to work too quickly because it's not going to dry on you really quick. So I lay down a small bead to one side of the line, usually the outside of the turn. And it's been a while since I've really done this, so I'm using way too much caulk. It doesn't really matter how thick it is. It will work with a really thin layer, which I should remember because I really just wasted a bunch of it. A really thin layer usually does it. And I start with the outside of the turn. I overlap it a little bit, line up the edges, and then just start to put it down. Now I'm going to pin the beginning of it because that will definitely move if I don't. And then I just try to follow that scribed line I made. And see that it lays down smooth. I remember years ago, I was doing an end scale layout and I tried using hot glue. And while it secured the road bed, it left big bumps under it. And for end scale, that really did not work very well. I like using the back of my tape measure to kind of just smooth it out. I'm trying not to stretch it, just trying to apply pressure to the top so that it goes down smooth. So at this point, if you see any bulges in the turn, then just stretch it out a little bit until it becomes nice and smooth. Now that I have one side down, I'll do the other. I lay it down and then I try to squeeze it towards the one I already did so that it closes the gap in between. I take the track and line it up and try to make sure that I did put the road bed where I want it. I have a very little bit of space between the roadbed and the bridge, so I can fix that up with no problem. So I've got the two overlapped. I'll just make a cut across it, and it lines up really nicely. Now at this point, if you see it separating anywhere, if the inside is kind of pulling out a little bit, you can add additional pins to keep it in place. I'm not seeing anything that concerns me. I mean, the nice thing about 3-rail track is that middle seam ends up pretty much right under the middle rail. So even if there is a bit of a seam, you're probably not going to see it. Try to wipe up any excess. Usually if you get a little bit on the foam, wiping it with a paper towel does the job. One of the nice features about the tubular track is it's so stiff. So all the little imperfections in the board really don't matter that much. It's just a little annoying. I was just rubbing my hand to make sure that the roadbed's down nicely and the foam's doing this. The foam board, not the roadbed. So I'm not thrilled with the foam board, but like I said, the track is not going to follow those divots anyway. Again, if it were N scale, it'd be a different issue. Then I like to put the track back down and see that it lines up as well as it can with where the track goes. Because of the silicone caulk, you can still move it a little bit, but I'm pretty happy with where it is. I'll just leave things on the track to weigh it down while the silicone dries. I'm not sure where I came up exactly with this the way I do it, but I really haven't had any problems with this method on this layout. And there are a number of sections of the layout where I've laid the roadbed and then had to pick it up. And I've been able to reuse 95% of the roadbed after peeling it off the layout and removing any of the residue of the silicone caulk. So really, it has worked fantastically for me. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time on DAGryffyn Hobby.